Frank walked into his apartment, still reeling from the encounter with Eugenia. He made himself a cup of tea and sat on his sofa, staring blankly at the wall. He knew that he had to keep his distance from Eugenia, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. He wondered what it was about her that made him feel so drawn to her, despite knowing that she was only interested in his money. As Frank sipped his tea, his mind began to wander to the past. He thought about his childhood and how he had grown up in a working-class family. His parents had always struggled to make ends meet, and Frank had learned from a young age that money was hard to come by. He had worked hard to get where he was today, but he had never forgotten his roots. Suddenly, Frank's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his best friend, Michael. "Hey, Frank, what's up?" Michael asked. "Nothing much," Frank replied. "Just had a strange encounter with a woman earlier." "Ooh, do tell," Michael said, sounding interested. Frank hesitated for a moment before telling Michael about his run-in with Eugenia. Michael listened intently, and when Frank was finished, he said, "Sounds like she's trouble. You should stay away from her." "I know," Frank said. "But there's something about her that I can't quite put my finger on." "Well, be careful," Michael warned. "You don't want to get hurt." With that, Michael ended the call, and Frank was left alone with his thoughts once again. He wondered what he was going to do about Eugenia. He knew that he should stay away from her, but he also knew that he couldn't stop thinking about her. As the day turned into night, Frank decided to take a walk to clear his head. He walked around his neighborhood, taking in the sights and sounds of the city. As he walked, he thought about his life and how he had gotten to where he was today. He thought about his career, his friends, and his family. But no matter what he thought about, his mind kept drifting back to Eugenia. As Frank walked, he passed a small park. He saw a couple sitting on a bench, holding hands and laughing. He felt a pang of jealousy, and he realized that he was lonely. He longed for a connection, for someone to share his life with. But he knew that he couldn't let his guard down, not with Eugenia around. Finally, Frank made his way back to his apartment. He climbed into bed, exhausted from the day's events. As he drifted off to sleep, he knew that he had a long road ahead of him. He didn't know what was going to happen with Eugenia, but he knew that he had to be careful. He had worked too hard to let someone take advantage of him. The next morning, Frank woke up early and got dressed for work. He made himself a cup of coffee and checked his phone, but there were no messages from Eugenia. He felt a twinge of disappointment but quickly pushed it aside. As he left his apartment, Frank noticed a man standing on the street corner, holding a sign that read, "Will work for food." He felt a pang of guilt and thought about how fortunate he was to have a steady job and a comfortable life. He walked past the man, but something made him stop. "Excuse me," Frank said. "Do you need any help?" The man looked up at him, and Frank saw that he was older than he had initially thought. His face was weathered, and his eyes were tired. "I could use some work," the man said, his voice hoarse. Frank thought for a moment before saying, "I might have something for you. Come with me." The man followed Frank to his office, where Frank explained that he needed someone to help with filing and organizing paperwork. The man accepted the job, and Frank felt a sense of satisfaction. He knew that he couldn't change the world, but he could help make a difference in someone's life. As the day went on, Frank found himself thinking about Eugenia less and less. He focused on his work and on helping the man he had met that morning. But just as he was about to leave for the day, his phone rang. It was Eugenia. "Hey, Frank," she said. "I was wondering if you wanted to go out for dinner tonight?" Frank hesitated for a moment before saying, "I don't know, Eugenia. I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Oh, come on," Eugenia said. "I promise it will be fun." Frank thought about it for a moment before saying, "Okay, fine. But I'm not paying for everything this time." Eugenia laughed. "Deal," she said. As Frank hung up the phone, he felt a sense of unease. He knew that he was walking into a trap, but he couldn't resist the pull of Eugenia's charm. He had to be careful, but he also knew that he had to find out what she was up to. With that thought in mind, Frank left his office and headed home to get ready for his dinner with Eugenia. He knew that he was taking a risk, but he also knew that he had to be brave. Frank arrived at the restaurant where he was meeting Eugenia, feeling nervous but determined to keep his guard up. He scanned the room and saw her sitting at a table in the corner, wearing a tight-fitting dress and a bright smile. "Hey, Frank," she exclaimed as he approached her. "You look great." Frank nodded, trying not to let her charm sway him. They ordered their food and drinks, and the conversation started out light and easy. Eugenia talked about her job at a high-end boutique and her passion for fashion. As they ate, Frank noticed that Eugenia kept looking around the restaurant, as if she was searching for someone. He wondered if she was expecting someone else to join them. He decided to confront her. "Eugenia, who are you looking for?" he asked. Eugenia looked at him, her eyes wide with innocence. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it seems like you're expecting someone else to show up," Frank said. Eugenia smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Maybe I am," she said. "Maybe I have a surprise for you." Frank felt a surge of anger. He didn't like being played for a fool. "What kind of surprise?" he demanded. Eugenia leaned in close to him, her voice low and seductive. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "A business proposition. I think you'll like it." Frank felt a flicker of curiosity. He had to admit, he was intrigued. "What kind of proposition?" he asked. Eugenia grinned. "It's simple," she said. "I have a friend who is willing to invest in your company. All you have to do is agree to certain terms." Frank felt a sense of disbelief. It sounded too good to be true. "What kind of terms?" he asked cautiously. Eugenia leaned back in her chair, her eyes dancing. "Let's just say that my friend has a taste for the finer things in life, and he wants to make sure that his investment pays off in more ways than one." Frank felt a cold chill run down his spine. He knew exactly what Eugenia was implying. She was offering him a deal with the devil, and she expected him to sell his soul to get ahead. But Frank was no fool. He knew that success wasn't worth compromising his values. He stood up from the table, ready to leave. "Eugenia, I think this conversation is over," he said. "I'm not interested in doing business with your friend, or with you." Eugenia's smile faded, replaced by a look of disappointment. "I thought you were different," she said. "I thought you were a risk-taker, someone who wasn't afraid to do what it takes to get ahead." Frank shook his head. "I am a risk-taker," he said. "But I'm also a man of integrity, and I won't compromise that for anyone." With that, Frank turned and walked out of the restaurant, feeling a sense of relief and triumph. He had faced his fears and come out on top. He knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready for them. He had learned that sometimes, the biggest risks were the ones that weren't worth taking.